So the British are going to guard this pass. They've set up in the field belonging to Eric's farm, and they're expecting the French down this road anytime. They know there's a French force coming. So the British commander in the middle there with the supply train has in front of him the King's German Legion, and behind them a howitzer. On his right flank he has two Nassau line regiments which make up a Nassau regiment, and behind them he has the Scotch Grey Dragoon Cavalry. Over on his left flank he has a field gun, and in the paddock, churning up the poor old farmers' root crops, are the British 1st Regiment, who were initially here for the first two battles to guard this farm. They've given their prime position to the King's German Legion, which is very nice of them. On their left flank they have a Prussian battalion, and behind that they have a Prussian regiment of Hussars, light cavalry. And so they wait the arrival of the French. Okay, here come the French, and as we look down the road we see that there's the commander of the French with his messengers. He's going to start moving his troops into position shortly. They're being led by two battalions of Swiss grenadiers and followed by light grenadiers of the French, so that would be the French strike force for today. On the right flank there's the 5th Hussars with their beautiful blue uniform guarding the flank. Further down the road we have the line regiments of the 21st and 22nd with the baggage train following. The French infantry of course marching on the side of the road to allow the guns to have the road. And on the right flank, French cuirassiers, heavy troops. Okay, so that's the French force. What we're going to do today is show you the battle in steps. I'm not going to explain to you how things are working. That will come at a later date when I do a review of Tricolour for you and why I like them so much. But today we're just going to see if the French can finally take Eric's farm. One thing I didn't mention before, there's a small contingent of 95th guarding this farmhouse here. There's not many, but they're just there to be an annoyance to the French until they get pushed back. Okay, so the French commander has set his forces up with the 22nd Line Regiment in attack column. His better units, the Saxon and French light grenadiers in the middle, supported by the heavy cavalry staying out of it just at the moment. His artillery has all been moved over to the right flank to form a battery, and the 21st French Line Regiment is formed up there. So if it's over on the flank here, remember that gap's not there, are the Hussars. Now what would typically happen here is the action will open with a cannonade, and I suspect what the French want to do here is, if possible, take out the British cannon field gun there. They can't of course get the howitzer because it's behind the King's German Legion, but if your troops are going to go forward in attack column, you don't want cannon pouring shot into them. So imagine that's how it's going to start, and that will be move 1. The end of move 1, and the artillery has started. The British artillery is a field gun. It's a little bit light on for punching power at this distance, and the French have actually, with their grand battery, managed to kill one of the gunners. The British howitzer is short of range. It won't reach the French heavies, but it is long range, and I suspect that this bombardment will go on for several moves until some sort of a decision is made and it's time for the infantry to move forward. Okay, so this has happened a little bit quicker than I thought. It's the end of move 3. The artillery barrage has been going on. The French have killed enough gunners that the British can no longer man their field gun, and the remaining crew have packed it up and moved it to a safe location. It is effectively out of action. The howitzer, of course, is still in action, and it will come into play as soon as the French get closer. But now that they've taken that field gun out, it might be that they intend to advance now. Okay, we're up to move 5, and what we can see here is that the British commander has sent a message out to the Scotch Greys with one of the messengers there. Now, we've been lucky enough to get a look at that message, scribbled as it was, and it basically says, Scotch Greys attack the Hussars and work around the French left flank. And I suspect the reason he's doing that is because there will be no artillery over there to cause them damage. It's all over on this flank, and he needs to take some pressure off the British commander's left flank. So that's interesting. The Scotch Greys should be an easy match for the French Hussars. Okay, end of move number 7, and the artillery bombardment from the French Grand Battery is still taking a toll on those British troops there, the 1st Line Regiment, but and the British howitzer is still killing a number of the Swiss Grenadiers. But over here, the Dragoons met up with the French Hussars, and I guess it was to be expected to an extent. They have ridden right over the top of them, totally annihilating them. This puts the French commander now in a bit of a quandary, because his flank now is opened. He still has his heavy cavalry at the back, which I suspect he'll deploy, but as far as advancing troops with these British Scotch Greys out on the flank, it's not looking like a good prospect at the moment. It's just things don't often go the way you plan in battle, but let's see what happens. The 8th move is finished, and you can see there that a messenger has been sent out by the French commander, and it's been received by his cuirassiers, and they're moving. And we again were just lucky enough to catch a glimpse of that order as it was being written, and it says, "Cuirassiers, your work is on the left flank." A little bit cryptic perhaps, but I think it's going to be quite obvious to them, and especially the commander of the cuirassiers, what he's expected to take care of. Now, these French Scotch Greys, British cavalry, after a successful attack, pay a penalty to reform, because they're quite hard to get back in order. It's one of those national characteristics. So they're reforming over there. Luckily for them, there's nothing to catch them while they're reforming. The howitzer is still lobbing shells into the Swiss, and the 95th are taking the occasional long-range shot at these other Swiss line regiments. But apart from that, British casualties are mounting up, but there's not much anyone can do about this. It's going to be decided, I think, by the cavalry on the flanks. That's the end of move 8. Move number 9, and we didn't get to see the orders for the Swiss battalion, but they were delivered, and they are obviously to attack that farmhouse and get rid of those annoying 95th. That's really all that's happening, just more casualties for the British. That's the end of move number 9. That's the end of move number 11, and how the pendulum has swung. Those French cuirassiers went straight around the flank and into action against the Scotch Greys, who were feeling quite chuffed that they'd ridden over the French Hussars, but they were themselves badly defeated and they're in retreat. And the French cuirassiers have secured for the French commander his left flank. So now the battle has reached a sort of, not a stalemate by any stretch. The French artillery have just about mauled that British regiment over there. There's not much of it left. The howitzer is taking a huge toll of the Swiss, and this Swiss line regiment is suffering in trying to evict the 95th Rifles from that house. So there's a bit of a plateau at the moment. I think each commander is going to have to a bit of a think about what their next move might be. End of move 13, lucky for some. And the British morale has finally cracked under severe casualties and they're retreating from the paddock. It's quite clear to see the order has been given to advance. Both of the line regiments are moving forward in an attack column. The Scotch Greys are in retreat with the cuirassiers following them up. It's become quite obvious that now is the time for to throw it all in. All the French units are moving forward. The attack is on. Move number 14. The French Grand Battery has switched targets now onto the Prussian line regiment here as the French 21st Regiment march on. Could you imagine what these people must be feeling as they look up and they see a whole French regiment approaching them, drums beating the attack, and they are one battalion facing them. Here come the masters of Europe, but these Prussians will hold their ground. Brave souls. They are backed up, of course, by their Hussar cavalry, which has gone into line formation. So this is going to be an interesting little skirmish here. Over on this flank, we see that the Swiss are advancing, still taking more casualties from the howitzer as they come. Brave lads. Over here, the Scotch Greys are retiring and they're being followed by the French cuirassiers, and of course the 22nd Regiment is moving forward, supported by the Light Grenadiers. These Swiss have taken the farmhouse. The 95th that were left decided they didn't want to be caught behind enemy lines, and they're taking off for the safety of their own lines. That's the end of move 14. Move number 15. The French attack column has marched into musket range of the Prussians, and they've both fired at each other. The Prussians' line now is depleting, whereas it hardly seems to have told on the French. Over here, and this is going to be interesting, I think, the Scotch Greys have come through the Nassau line regiment, just opened up to let them through. And here are the French cuirassiers. What are they going to do? Are they going to face the Nassau Rifles and charge, or hold? What the Nassau should be doing with cavalry around is forming square. However, they can't, because right behind them are the French infantry approaching. If they form square, the cuirassiers only have to hold them there in square without doing anything till the infantry arrive, and they will smash that square to pieces. So the Nassau are in a very unenviable position. Let's see what happens there. 95th are scurrying back. The howitzer's finally taken its toll. The last shot has just broken the morale of this Swiss battalion, and it's had enough. It's heading for home, and who can blame them? All the way along there's just a line of their dead, but they did keep going until they could go no further. So that's the end of move number 15. This is now the end of move 16, and what an exciting move it's been. The Grand Barrier of the French have changed target onto the King's German Legion behind the wall here, and is now starting to take casualties out there. Remember the attack columns of the French approaching the Prussian regiment? They went straight over the top of it, as was probably to be expected. The Prussian hussars put in a brave attack against the column, and for a moment there it looked like they might actually be able to turn the whole French regiment attack back, but they failed, and they are now in retreat, and the French of course have completely broken through on this flank. The hussars may be able to reform and attack again, but their numbers are dwindling, and I don't think they'd withstand the French volley fire if they came back. Now remember, over here the Scotch Greys had been let through by the Nassau Line Regiment, and the question was, what was it to do? Well, it stood in line and delivered a volley at the cuirassiers, who decided to attack, and it took some out, but they in turn smashed into it and annihilated the line and continued through to this point where they're having to reform, but at the same time the Scotch Greys are reforming. These French will reform faster than the Scotch Greys. They will attack them and basically annihilate them unless the Scotch Greys just retreat down the road and off the battlefield. We have then French cuirassiers in the rear of this other Nassau battalion, and what are they going to do? Form square against the cavalry, with the French just here, with almost within attack distance now, charge distance. It's over. The British commander realises now both his flanks have collapsed, and there's nothing for it but to ask for terms, which the French commander will most likely give, and they'll probably be along the lines of leave your muskets, the officers can keep their swords, and retire down this road to Avignon. That would be the best that they could hope for. As you can see, the French column, the attack column over there, is in good order. It can swing around on this flank. This regiment, the 22nd, are in very good order. They haven't even been touched yet, the French Grenadiers, and they're good troops. The Swiss might have something to say to the gunners of the howitzer, though. They seem to have been picked on all day long. But we're going to call it there. Oh, and of course the French Grand Battery is still in action. At the very worst, it could just sit there and pound these British and Allied troops to bits. So the commander is doing the right thing by saving what he can of his troops. They've put up a good show, but just been totally overwhelmed by the French. And so 16 moves for this game. And when you consider that a lot of those moves were just artillery fire, it's actually not been a long game, and that's one of the beauties of Tricolour, is you can actually have a game of this size. It's not the biggest game we've ever played by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a fairly reasonable one to illustrate different units, and you can do it in an afternoon comfortably, or a morning. So yeah, it's a fairly quick game in that sense. We don't normally put out the casualties. I just did that so you could see where the action has taken place, and we don't glorify it in any way. But tactics, yeah, if they weren't there, you might forget that that's where the Crusaders came through. All right, so thank you for watching this game. There'll be more in the future, and I will do a special editorial on tricolour and why I like it in the near future. Thank you. I'd like to now do just a quick post-mortem of the battle here. You'll remember the stages that it went through. The French artillery, which was stationed on that road up there, opened up and concentrated on the British 1st Regiment in that field there. The British commander, because the French artillery was on that side of the his field, decided to let the Scotch Greys go and try and take some pressure off his forces, so that the Scotch Greys rode out in this direction and went across and annihilated right over the top of the French Hussars at this point in the battle. They then reformed. The French commander got his cuirassiers to come around, and the cuirassiers met the Scotch Greys and defeated them. In all fairness, that was a fairly equal battle, and it could have gone either way, but for reasons best known to fate, the cuirassiers won. At that point, the French commander saw that it was time to launch the big attack, and the French 22nd Regiment attacked on that flank, and the French 21st Regiment attacked on this flank. Now, as they were moving forward, the Scotch Greys returned through the lines of the Nassau back to this area to reform, but they were chased in and by the cuirassiers, who went straight into the Nassau's, taking some casualties and doing it, but going straight over the top of them. At about the same time, the attack column over here, the 22nd, I believe, hit the Prussians, and there was just no contest there. But the Prussian Hussars then attacked the column, and again, you know, it was a fairly even fight. They could have pushed that whole French regiment made up of 3 battalions. They could have sent it back, but again, the French prevailed, and the Hussars were forced back. Their numbers so reduced that really they I'm not going to say they were an ineffectual force, but I don't think they were going to turn the tide. Again, the French Grand Battery then turned on the KGL behind the stone wall there and started to take casualties, and at this point the British commander knew that with both flanks collapsed, the game was over. So the French tactics, aggressiveness after preparing for the attack, the defenders, what else could they do? They did the best they could. If their Scotch Greys had been more effective and beat the cuirassiers, could have been an entirely different battle. One thing that the defenders lacked was perhaps hitting power with artillery, although that howitzer did some damage to the Swiss. It wasn't really a war winner at this point, whereas the Grand Battery was really starting to take a toll on the defenders' numbers. The field gun, of course, which just really didn't make the grade by the Grand Battery of the French, killing too many of its gunners. They just packed up and basically left and set up camp back here and sat there for the whole of the battle. So all in all, the French actually came out of this without too many casualties. whereas the defenders suffered quite a bit. And when you're defending, that's generally the other way around. But so that's just a quick post-mortem of the tactics used and the outcomes. We'll leave it at that for now. Goodbye and thanks for watching.